I'm going to call the order. Mobile Source Committee meeting, July 20th, 2018. I believe that our first item up is a presentation by Sarah Reese. Ms. Reese?
Yeah, great.
Okay, go right ahead.
Great. So yeah, my name is Sarah Reese. I'm an Assistant Deputy Executive Officer for Planning here at South Coast, and I'm here to talk about our request to appropriate funds and to issue a request for proposals to conduct a study for potential economic impacts of a rule on facility-based measures on warehouses and distribution centers. Next slide. So, so by way of background, back in May of this year, the board directed staff to pursue rulemaking for warehouses and distribution centers. At the time, there was a lot of discussion about potential economic impacts, impacts on jobs, impacts on the industrial real estate industry in general. And so as part of this, the board further directed staff to look at an economic impact study on what a potential rulemaking would look like for warehouses and distribution centers. That studies will look at competitiveness of the logistics sector, looking at potential for cargo diversion, for diversion outside to areas adjacent to the district, looking at impacts on jobs, and then also looking at impacts of the industrial real estate market in the district. We would be looking at the results of the study to further inform rulemaking and also to help us with our socioeconomic impact analysis that would be required as part of any proposed rule. We would seek to bring the results of the study back to the board for discussion prior to bringing any proposed rule for board consideration. And this would be part of our report back that we have to the full board every 3 to 6 months on progress on rulemaking and measures for warehouses and distribution centers. So we're here today to ask for requests to release the request for proposal and to do that in September to conduct this economic impact study. If everything goes on schedule, we'd probably be starting this study in the January 2019 timeframe. And then also as part of this, we're requesting to appropriate up to $200,000 in funding from the general fund undesignated balance fund to support this work. Any questions?
Any questions from any of my colleagues?
I have none.
None. Move the item.
I'll second.
Okay. Maybe we have a roll call. Clerk.
Yes. Mayor Judith Mitchell?
Well,
Yes.
well, excuse me, hold it. We probably should ask, is there anyone there at the district that would like to comment on this item?
No public comment.
None there? Okay. None at your location, Supervisor?
No. No.
Okay. Let's call the roll.
Ms. Judy Mitchell?
Yes.
Supervisor Solis?
Yes.
Dr. Parker?
Yes. Okay. That particular item, the next one is an information-only item. That is going to be presented by Catherine Garrison.
Good morning. I just flew in, arrived. So great timing on everyone's part. And thank you very much for inviting us from the California Air Resources Board to speak about 2 of our fleet rules, our proposed regulations. We're very excited to be here. And just letting you know, I'm pinch hitting for the Innovative Clean Transit. They are working amazingly hard right now on that regulatory package. It's quite a heavy lift. Every year there's more exciting requirements for us. Thank you. So let's go ahead and start on the second slide here. So transit buses are leading the way. And this also is a reflection to the history that transit agencies were among the first fleets to deploy alt fuels. And so they've been early adopters of technology. And once again, they have been the leaders with adopting both battery electric buses and fuel cell powered buses, and many of them within fleets that provide emission reductions within your air basin. So it's very exciting that they're doing that, and we're very excited about the zero emission activities, these vehicles going in deployment, where they'll be operated in congested areas, where they'll provide, the zero tailpipes will provide immediate reductions for those communities. They're centrally located in fuel, which helps with that piggybacking of the associated infrastructure. And those communities will have direct access to riding on newest technologies. So we also wanted to say that this beachhead measure will provide that technology transfer. So we're looking here at those 3 sub-bullets and how, pardon me, not the sub-bullets, just on how that beachhead and the technology transfer to others. I'm on slide 2 still, and transit agencies provide connectivity. Is this my
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And also wanted to say this last bullet on the slide is just that reflection about public transit is an important piece of smart transportation policies and planning. And that once again, their operational experience of deploying the latest technologies is really useful for other fleets deploying these vehicles. And also the public that we riding on these vehicles will also have that wonderful experience. And perhaps when they're choosing a purchase within their own area, they might choose to ride a technology that they were using on the buses. Ooh, let me settle a bit here. So this slide is very exciting to show the commitments of the transit agencies. And I teased out the deployments within your air basin in the green font there. So you can see it's really great what's happening. I know at your May Mobile Source Mobile Source Committee meeting, you guys talked about the fleet rules. Zurich, I believe you were talking about the survey, and this is letting you know what is happening now in those commitments going forward. So let's move on to the next one. And this is a little bit different than the other slide because this is letting you know about the commitment of another additional 655. And by the way, since the slide was done, there's been more activity. So when the Innovative Clean Transit will go before the cardboard in September, you'll see even more activity on the slide. So that's super exciting about these transit agencies moving forward. So the current proposal, and by the way, the Innovative Clean Transit staff has been working really diligent and extensively with their stakeholders, and especially with the California Transit Agency Association, CTA, and also the individual transit agencies. And they're trying to make sure this will be a successful proposal, regulation for all parts of the state, including providing important emission reductions within the South Coast Air Basin. So this proposal, wanted to let you know, we'll go to the next 3 slides, we'll have a little bit more detail on it. So this is an overview. So transit agencies this is the first bullet, they'll be able to develop individual plans and showing their transition to zero emission fleet by 2040. And then the ZEV purchase minimums, so starting in 2023, if a transit agency will be making a purchase, then there'll be requirements they have to make on that, and that will be starting in 2023. And then there's a waiver there where fleets could use credit towards compliance later. So that's definitely hoping to get people to take action earlier. And then the next one, this innovative mobility program, that is letting transit agencies get credits on that first and last mile problem that they had. So vehicles less than 14,000 GVWR, gross vehicle weight rating, in their fleet, and also like if they're rolling out those like electric bike programs and also car sharing, they'll be able to get credit for that. And so that's just one way of recognizing the importance of different mobility options, also help provide zero emission reductions. And then those last few slides are, definitely the purchase of renewable fuels. And I've heard so much Judy Mitchell, who's also on our board, talk about how the NOx emission reductions are so much needed for your air basin. And so that purchase of the low NOx engines, so if the fleet is not going to be purchasing a zero emission bus, then they must get that low NOx engine. So that'll help you with those important 2023 and 2031 emission reductions. So here, just wanted to let you know the scope, or the regulation will require vehicles greater than 14,000 pounds GVWR to, when they're buying a new bus, to meet those percentages. And wanted to let you know also that we recognize that the trolley, rail, or the overhead catenary systems that many of the transit agencies use deploy zero emissions, but this regulation is looking at the transformation of those internal combustion powered engines. And so when we talk about what we're regulating, we're not requiring additional action on those items. But we do realize that it's zero emissions. So when you're looking at that fleet and how you can get more emission reductions, we're looking at those internal combustion engines and how to get them to zero tailpipe. And we also wanted to let you know that this regulation will not capture airport shuttle bus fleets. That's the regulation I'm heading up, and I'll talk about that in the next presentation. And also wanted to let you guys know that the CARB and many entities are rolling out many incentive programs to help with that turnover for school buses. And also the university fleets in particular. I have a child that attends a UC, actually UC Irvine, and I am so excited that UC Irvine has the first public university fleet that's zero tailpipe, in California. So you may not be aware, but the UC has a commitment to be carbon neutral before 2030, and so their fleets are going ahead and moving to those zero tailpipes. So those are some other exciting efforts that are going on. And just also wanted to touch on that regulations are one way to get those emission reductions, and another important way is incentive programs. So getting back to what is this proposed regulatory proposal for the innovative clean transit? So this slide here illustrates a little bit what's required. So something to tease up is that there's that asterisk on the 2023 and the 2024. So you can earn potential waivers for doing early action on that. So it's kind of like you get credits and then you can cash them in later. And also wanted to let you know that that middle slide, the middle column is for large transit agencies. And so the lower right, we have there the defined, the large fleets are 100 and more active buses, and small fleets are less than 100 active buses. And so how this would work, if you're a large transit agency and you were going to make a bus purchase greater than 14,000 GVWR in 2023, then the proposed regulation is saying 25% of that must be zero emission vehicles. So let's say the transit agency is going to buy 100 vehicles, then that means 25 of those buses must be zero emission vehicles. And then there's also that requirement, the other purchases must be those low NOx engines and renewable CNG on there. So that's how that works. So the compliance determination is a snapshot look each year. December 31st is where CARB will determine if the fleets are in compliance. And so that'll be adding up, the buses in operation, the buses on order, some of the credits from the early compliance or the mobility, and see if they meet the required actions. So that's how it would be taken a look at. So now here we have a couple more slides showing the emission reductions proposed statewide because of this proposed regulation. And so here we have a green line showing the tailpipe emission reductions without this proposed regulation. And this is CARB's modeling, taking into account all of those factors that affect things. And now we have the yellow or the gold line, which is kind of showing you that delta of on the left side is your tailpipe NOx reductions, and on the right side, those estimated reductions on PM 2.5. So the 2029, 2030 is, we'll go back to this slide really quick to show you. So at the end of this schedule, you can see 2029 and after, both for the large and the transit fleets, is if they're doing a purchase of a new bus, it must be zero emission bus. So that's why we can see a dramatic separation of those two lines, the green and the gold, moving forward. And here we have our wheel-to-wheel estimated statewide greenhouse gas emission reductions. And just showing again around that 2030, you can see where the gap is definitely increasing, because that's when we'll realize the full effects of the emission reductions. So CARB has heard from transit agencies the importance of the procurement process. And so we are working with the Department of General Services in developing a statewide zero emission bus procurement for transit buses. And so this kind of works on that purchasing power where other transit agencies may be able to piggyback upon this other effort and go through this. So that would definitely save transit agencies time, money, and also that they already know the price. So for the next few years, they'll know through their planning process what will be the price for that zero emission bus. And it also provides the manufacturers of these buses market certainty of what these customers will be paying for those vehicles. And we have heard that transit agencies throughout the U.S. have for many years piggybacked on programs. There's a very famous Washington State procurement process that Oregon and many other entities piggyback on. So we're very excited about this effort, and we all know that that'll be an extra additional benefit and help on that ease of procuring the latest technology. So this slide here, I wanted to touch base on the timeline, and I also wanted to let you know if you have questions about this measure, I have contact information on the last slide for the people who are, I mentioned earlier, as pinch hitting, or maybe I should say substituting, because I'm not on their team, right? I'm just here for this short inning. So please be aware if you ask questions, I can make sure and connect you with those people. And so here on their timeline, they had a workshop last month, and they're collecting informal comments on that proposal. And I wanted you to underline that August 10th deadline, and that's where the package will be released for starting that mandated process of that 45-day open comment period. So that's what we call that formal comment period. And so so we're July 20th. In a little bit, you guys will have their final proposal to look at. And then they'll be presenting their proposal to the CARB board September 27th, 28th. And the second hearing, which is to finalize the CEQA environmental assessment, will be in the winter of 2018-19, and anticipated effective date of the regulation would be January 1st, 2020. I'll go ahead and start the presentation now on the zero emission airport shuttle bus effort. And I am so excited about this map here. It's showing many exciting areas. So this gold layer is showing the disadvantaged communities, you know, that Cal EnviroScreen 3.0. It's so exciting to look at that map. And here you can see the areas in the state where there's those disadvantaged communities. And then we kind of have, it almost looks like little circles. Those are around the commercial airports throughout the state. And you can kind of see those kind of lighter colors on there. And then there's a blue-gray area. And that's showing the, for the 75 ppb ozone standard, the federal ozone standard, that's showing you the areas in the state that are not meeting those requirements. So if you zero in, too bad I can't expand the slide for you all. If you zero in on the South Coast Air Quality Management Air Basin, you could see that there's quite a few of these airport shuttles that operate in a disadvantaged community, and also where there's concerned health benefits of not meeting the federal health-based standards. So the proposed regulation will remove those harmful tailpipes from the shuttles, and it will provide communities, including disadvantaged communities, cleaner air immediately upon deployment of them. And it'll also reduce the exposure to the airport staff, the people operating the vehicles, the people breathing all of the, you know, I just flew down this morning, and I could say at one point I was holding my breath because, you know, I'm walking on the plane and I'm like, right? Definitely, you know, there's some diesel PM coming in there and some other stuff. So definitely helping provide immediate benefits to travelers. And letting you guys know that the travelers include people that are sensitive receptors. You know, families travel together. So you definitely would help with providing immediate emission reductions to those unique sectors affected by air quality problems. And then this is a beachhead measure. So it's definitely like an innovative clean transit where these would be a way to get in use heavy duty vehicles on that zero tailpipe pathway. So I wanted to show you around the world, there's been lots of exciting activities at airports in their fleets, their shuttle fleets, plugging into zero emission shuttles. And I use the term plugging in, unlike the transit entities in the state, airports throughout the world, the United States and California, haven't been deploying fuel cell buses. They've just been deploying battery electric buses. So this is showing you what they're plugging into here. So the gold areas are those zero emission fleets, those battery electric vehicles operating in the state. And I flew into the Ontario International Airport today, and you can see that they right now have 3 battery electric buses that they're operating. So if you park there at the airport parking lot, you may have observed when you ride that shuttle to the terminal that that's a zero emission vehicle. And the consultant who runs that service for the airport also received some of your grants. You guys, SCAQMD worked with EPA and got some airshed grants. And so they love their zero emission shuttles, and they shared with us that they got 4 of your grants. So they're in the process of ordering and having delivered some more zero emission vehicles. So that's very exciting. These efforts happening right here in Southern California. So I know in May, Zoric talked about the public fleets and what the survey results were. I wanted to touch on the base and let you guys know that our proposed regulation would impact public and private fleets. And so public would be, for example, the Ontario case where the airport contracts out part of that service. So that would be under the public umbrella. And then we have the private fleets. So the private fleets, perhaps the best example would be at LAX. Have you guys, instead of parking at LAX, the airport parking lot, parked off-site when you travel? So those private off-airport facilities would be part of the private fleets. Also the hotel courtesy shuttles. And if there's a destination shuttle that picks you up, for example, I've seen the buses with the Disney characters on, you know, when I travel to see my son at UC Irvine, right? Seen those character buses. So if they go directly from the airport to, let's say, the theme park, then they would be captured in our proposed regulation. If you're picked up from that hotel shuttle from the airport and you go to the hotel, then that would be impacted from the regulation. So that's what we're looking at here. And so you can see our fleet is no more than 100 vehicles. And so I've shared with my executive office that I call this a boutique regulation, meaning that we're specialized, we're a beachhead measure. We're basing this on what works now. You've seen these projects being deployed right here in Southern California. And so we're also going to be able to, that public visibility where people will see that. And so we definitely know this will help get that technology transferred to other on-road heavy-duty efforts, and also we're hoping to off-road efforts too. And before I move on to the next one, I wanted to share something I was super excited about. So I was talking about when you travel to LAX, well, there's a company called Wally Park, and they got a Sustainable National Award last year for being the first private airport parking lot to deploy 100% zero emission vehicles. So they've been in operation, some of them for 18 months now, and from what we understand, they've been very excited about those vehicles and about this good for the environment. So I'm super excited about that. All this market, private companies putting their money towards these battery electric vehicles. It seems like we're at a great time to come in with a regulatory requirement. So here I have 2 slides showing the emission reductions from our 100% in-use fleet requirements. So you can see that at the end point, which is 2035, there'll be a lot of emission reductions. And the business as usual is the darker shade there. And the NOx emission reductions are showing the tailpipe. As I was explaining to my executive office when we were briefing them on our boutique measure, we were explaining that this fleet is mostly alternative fueled, whether it's compressed natural gas or gasoline. And so there will be some emission reductions with the PM, but it's not a huge amount. So we're focusing on the NOx and also on the GHG emission reductions there. So our scope, we are looking at a fixed route shuttle that's supporting California's large, medium, and small hub airports. And what that would mean for your air basin is that the LAX airport would be required to go zero emission vehicles, and also those private fleets that serve the airport. And then under the mediums, that would be Burbank International Airport, Ontario, and also John Wayne. And then for the small, you guys have the Long Beach International Airport as well as the Palm Springs. And so this interesting terminology, we wanted to tease out and regulate what the current technology can support. So we came up with terms like fixed route, and then we put in another, looking at those pink dots there, the domiciled within 15 miles of the service airport, and you have your fixed destination route, no more than 30 miles. And that is to work on what is supported right now and these vehicles performing are able to do. It would be nice in the future, maybe who knows how long in the future, for those, for example, we've talked to some folks that provide a service from Bakersfield, where they transport people all the way down to LAX. And it's a nonprofit, and they want to buy zero emission vehicles, and they know for them the option is hydrogen. And so they also have that part of the puzzle where you buy the vehicles, and you also need the procurement to match up with that. So so if it's a hot day, we're talking about temperatures like 120 and lots of traffic to get out of the LA basin, they're probably going to need to, pull over and refuel the hydrogen tank. And so we're looking right now what we can meet, realizing in the future when more of the, the work of the California Energy Commission, those rollout of other items that more publicly accessible heavy duty charging stations, they'll be able to get a bigger range. And part of also, I see some questions on faces. I wanted to say that this idea of teasing out those quick short routes that are repeated, that was something that was in the CARB mobile source strategy document. And before that document, it was teased out with the technical assessments on the battery electric heavy duty vehicles. In fact, they called out airport shuttles being perfect for this type of use. So hopefully everyone has understanding of that now, and we're moving on now to what is our proposed schedule for fleet transformation. Here we go. So there's three main parts of our requirements. And first is our early action incentives voluntary period. So that's that 2018 to 2020. And just skip that 2022 date for a second. So right now our proposal has this new zero emission vehicle purchase requirement in 2023. So if you're buying or adding a vehicle to your fleet, we would require that it be a zero emission starting in 2023. If enabled to make sure that we're able to enforce that provision, we would have fleets starting to report to us on an annual basis every year in 2022. You know, so 2022, you tell us where your fleet is. 2023, we do the check, see if you're meeting that new purchase requirement. And then every year through 2035, fleets will report to us. And then now I call it our third main part is our compliance milestones. So we have a third of your fleet must be a zero emission vehicle by 2027. An additional third, or 66% by 2031, will be a zero emission. And then in 2035, 100% of your fleet must be zero emissions. So that's the proposal we came out with, and we've been workshopping for the last year. So what does that mean? So I wanted to show here on this schedule here, that voluntary, that very light blue grayish color there. I kind of think of that as like a green light for using incentive funding. It's a great opportunity for those fleets to, I know AQMD here has many incentive programs. They could tap into those. We know, for example, Wally Park and Ontario International Airport has already been tapping into those incentive programs and doing that early action deployment. So let's say it's a hotel courtesy shuttle, and they have 3 shuttles in their fleet. That would mean by 2027, one of those vehicles must be a zero emission. And then in 2031, 2 of those 3 must be zero emission, and then by 2035, 100%. So that's how our in-use fleet rule would be working with the new purchase requirement, and also the support of that in-use fleet compliance milestones. And wanted to touch on that. Our survey results have shown the vehicles in this area have an average vehicle life 12 years or more, 12 years for the airport controlled, and then on the off-airport private ones are a little bit less. It turned out the survey results were 10 years, so our proposal is that we assumed an average useful life of 12 years. There is exceptions to that. Some of the airports joke. For example, I know that some of the buses LAX operated, I think Burbank bought. So there's kind of this trade down. So some of the airports say you can do a lot with rubber bands and paper clips. Yes. So working with what the industry has told us, that natural turnover is our schedule on those requirements. So next steps, we're in our informal feedback right now. In October, we'll release our staff report. That'll be that 45 days before our first December board hearing. I believe right now it's scheduled for December 13th. Hopefully it won't be Friday the 13th. And then our second hearing will be fall winter 2019, and the anticipated rule effective date would be 2020. I touched a little bit about incentives, our cost share. I wanted to talk a little bit about exciting efforts underway by the California Public Utilities Commission and the electric utilities to remove those transportation electrification barriers. I believe most of you are familiar with SB 350, so I just wanted to update you that we're super excited that recently 15 of the 16 priority review projects totaling over 42 million were approved. Wanted to highlight that Southern California Edison proposal for $343 million on these projects were approved by CPUC, and rebates of up to that make-ready electrification will be available for transit buses, school buses, and also airport shuttles. And similar rebates for other vehicles in the disadvantaged communities would be available also. San Diego Gas and Electric's proposal will be considered separately. And that last bullet there, I just wanted to touch on that we have a very solar-rich energy grid right now, and so there's been talk about changing that rate structure, and that would realize that the cost of generating power in the afternoon is not as costly as it used to be, since there's so much solar panels in use right now. And as you're aware, the California grid continues to be more and more fueled with renewable energy sources. So there'll be some changes on that. So state cost share opportunities. So very excited about the NOx mitigation funds going to be in action for transit buses, school buses, and also shuttle buses. So for example, airport shuttles could apply for these vehicles and get money up to those related costs for those different categories. That's the idea is that the $130 million would be released in 2 solicitations, and it would become as first come, first serve. If you're a government-owned fleet, which would which you may not know, but the California commercial airports are owned and operated by local entities. So they would be available for up to 100% of that cost. And then there's another statewide program, the HVIP and low NOx engine incentives, so $193 million into that. And we anticipate for this coming fiscal year another $125 million. And the voucher amounts depend on the vehicle size, the technology, and if they're operating in a disadvantaged community. And then the Carl Moyer program. So recently that statewide funding pot has been increasing. We estimate $79 million for the next one. And then we have the exciting efforts at AB 617, additional $245 million for fiscal year 18-19. And so these are all programs that airport shuttles and transit bus shuttle, these fleets could apply for and get to. I wanted to touch on other state opportunities. There's some programs operated by the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program and also the Low Carbon Transit Operation Program, and those are eligible for transit buses. A unique federal program is available for airports. There's a grant program that fleets could apply for, and that federal grant program says that they can get local match from non-fed sources. And so, for example, these publicly operated airports could perhaps discuss opportunities on stacking funds with programs here at South Coast to help deploy those zero emission vehicles. Moving on, this is our last slide here, and the contact information. We have Sharon and Yao Chen, the lead staff and manager of the Innovative Clean Transit. I'm Catherine Garrison, lead staff on there, and then my boss is Femi there. So we have our contact information there as well as our webpage information. Would you have questions for me now?
Thank you very much, Catherine. It's very informative. I have a couple of questions. What happens, first of all, where's the large portion of the funding coming from for these, for the subsidies of these particular vehicles? I know about the Carl Moyer. but some of them, looking at what happens after the 10 or 12 years, the useful life of these particular buses runs out. How are these agencies themselves going to read them? And where would that pot of money itself be coming from?
Yes. So I believe what you're talking about is that incentive programs, the different programs have different requirements. Many of them, like the Carl Moyer, have a legal requirement, in California Health and Safety Code that they must provide surplus and also emission reductions that will be attributed to the state implementation plan. So yes, you are correct that in the early phase-in period, many of these incentive programs will be available for fleets, and at a certain point in time, the fleets will not have that access to incentive programs. And you may not realize, I've been working on the Carl Moyer program for the past 10 years, and the incentive programs like the Carl Moyer, and it's very rich and on all these programs now out there, is to help with that early deployment of the cleanest technology. And at some point, it'll be where that incremental cost to choose the cleanest vehicle, we're very hopeful and have seen, like with the rollout of the CNG technology, that cost to go with the cleaner comes down and down and down. And part of these measures, the two regulations I talked about, are where we're trying to get that market there where it'll be self-sustaining, and so that incremental cost will be shrink and be lower and lower. Did you have it?
So I assume also this means that the near zero emission vehicles will be completely kaput. You won't be able to use any of them at the shuttle buses?
I would like I would like to say that both of the proposed regulations work with that works with that useful life of the vehicle. So industry has told us for the different measures what the useful life is, and the schedule on the compliance requirements works with that. So for example, if I own an airport shuttle and it operates 12 years, and if you add 12 years to there, you could see that they will be able, in their normal procurement process, when they're choosing to buy another vehicle, they will be able to go to that zero emission. So what I'm trying to say is that we are proposing there won't be a stranded asset, so that fleet owner will have, let's say, that low NOx engine, but at some point it'll need to be replaced. And when they replace it, that's when they'll go to the zero emission.
Just show the slide showing where they could use.
Oh, okay.
0, 0.
I don't know how to do that.
Can you put the slides back up, please?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that exchange of comments that was being made.
Oh, Wayne was trying to help me with the technology here.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was suggesting I show you this slide here. Okay, so fleets would be requiring, if they buy a new vehicle in 2023, to be a ZEV. This is for the airport shuttle bus. And then the requirements, so 2023 to 2035, that's a 12-year program. And so that vehicle investment is worth 12 years. And then at some point, they'll need to have a new vehicle to replace it. And so when they buy that new vehicle, we will mandate that, we're proposing, I should say, that'll be a zero emission vehicle.
Keep that chart up. One of my concerns is the metropolitan district. We have shuttle buses, not shuttle buses, but regular transportation buses. And I believe they probably are right now 95%, and Matt can correct me on this, 95 to 98% near zero emission, natural gas. And my concern is, if we are saying that now everything has to be zero emission, I believe they have thousands and thousands of buses. Matt, do you know what the numbers themselves are?
Well, Supervisor Solis is on their board. I would
let her answer. But they have, yeah, they're the 6th largest transit agency in the United States. They're 100% natural gas. I don't know what percent is near zero, but it's a small percent.
I know, because it was just only about a year and a half ago, they were beginning to try out some zero-emission buses, and the concerns that they had, that would they be able to get the turnaround time to get between the stations for recharging in a reasonable amount of time. So when I see that we're saying that, yes, we want to go to zero emission, what's going to happen to places like Los Angeles Basin, where we had near zero emissions, and there are thousands and thousands of these buses that exist here. My question really is that what has this been considered at all by CARB?
Dr. Parker? So this is Wayne. I think
Yes.
the issue of the natural gas engine should look at the level between near zero and what the current standard of is 0.2. And I think, as Dr. Miyasato just said, that the actual number of natural gas engines that are currently deployed that are at near zero is actually very low. Is that correct, Dr. Miyasato?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and in part, that's just because of the recent certification of these near zero engines. So a lot of those natural gas engines are at the 0.2 and not the 0.02.
Oh, so what we're saying is that the definition itself doesn't necessarily fit the actual representation of what we're talking about. It's not totally zero. It's somewhere basically between 0 and 0.2.
Yes.
Did I understand you correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so just because it's natural gas doesn't mean it's near zero.
I understand.
Yes.
Okay. Other of my colleagues have questions, I'm certain, that I just wanted to make that clear because it was something that was a little bit.
Yes, I have.
Go ahead.
Supervisor Solis. I just wanted to comment that we have begun the acquisition of our zero emission buses with Metro. And I believe where we're starting is, incrementally, and with the passage of Measure M, that's helping us to, couple our monies as well so that we can purchase more buses. So I think we have already allocated funding for, I think, well over 200 now. And there's more in the loop, but it is a slow process to be able to acquire the buses and to make sure that they have that we have reliability. Because you raised a good point, Dr. Parker. We've had some issues with with some of the electric buses already that BYD and others have been providing. So we're hopeful that the industry will get better on that part, because we need to have reliability as well. We're faced with many challenges, and also trying to get to zero emissions by 2030. It's ominous, a goal, and we know we have to work with what's available on the market, but we are trying very hard. And I think Measure M is really what's helping most of the basin right now, that we're able to work with our cities, county, and other parts of the district to try to really turn our fleets over. But even with the County of Los Angeles, it is also a challenge.
I'm very excited to hear about that effort. And me in substituting role, just wanted to bring up the slide number 3 and one of the LA Metro there. The total buses is 2,452. And all ZEV target, we mean that there was a commitment by your board to do that 2030 target. And that's just wanted to reflect that we're very proud of those transit agencies making those public commitments towards those zero emission vehicles.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of questions, if I may.
Go right ahead.
Thank you.
So we have a lot of municipal fleets in the LA County, well, the whole basin area.
Yes.
And I'm assuming this rule will cover all fleets, no matter what size. Is that correct?
Yes, the Innovative Clean Transit Rule proposal is to cover all transit fleets in the state. Yes.
The size matters. Where size matters is where it's the 14,000, whatever that measurement is, bus, right?
Well, and whether
There's
they have
100
100 or more
large
trucks, buses.
Oh, okay, so.
There's
Large transit, small transit,
there's-
purchase requirements.
yes, thank
So
you.
it still
There's
does
two
require 100
schedules.
buses.
There's two
The
schedules
small-
there.
The smaller ones have to do it, they just get a little more time.
And small fleets defined as 100 buses.
Less than
So
100.
Less than 100.
less than 100.
Less than 100.
So if I have a little bus outfit in my city that runs 25 buses there in the.
And in 2026, you get 25% of your purchases have to be zero emission.
Okay. Okay. So, let's see, what else? Okay. On slide 11, I want to look at that for a minute.
That one.
So what was the one that showed the reductions?
It's previous,
That,
that's the greenhouse gas reductions, and they have the PM.
and it had the business as usual
Yes.
thing, which
Was
slide
it the
was
bar
that?
graph or the
It was the bar graph.
bar graph is the airport?
Oh, okay. Find it.
There's this one for the shuttle, for the transit, and this one for the airport.
Yeah, it's this one. It's this paragraph. Oh, it's 16. It's slide 16. Because what's interesting to me is that in 2017, it shows this high number, 60 tons per year. And then 10 years later, it's dramatically reduced. And both of those are business as usual. So I'm wondering what accounts for that dramatic drop in the NOx emissions.
Yes, I mentioned that a majority of our fleet is alternative fuel. There is some very, very old model yeared diesel fueled vehicles, and the natural turnover of those vehicles will mean that they'll be replaced, and if they choose to buy diesel, that new diesel engine will be even cleaner than the old one that they're operating now.
Okay.
We did indeed talk to our inventory folks about that, and it with such a small inventory boutique, it's interesting how something like that could happen. Yeah, meaning that some very, very old vehicles could indeed show so much emissions, and then in a few years their useful life will be over, and then when they replace them, they'll be much, much cleaner.
And then the other thing that was in your slides was the agreement to work with Department of General Services and the purchases of buses. That was slide 11.
Yes.
And I'm wondering on that, who are the vendors that DGS will be working with?
That is a great question. I believe that would be any of the vendors that meet the requirements, and one of the requirements would be that they make a hydrogen fuel cell bus or a battery electric bus. Hello? Yes, so definitely Proterra, BYD. There's some conversion companies that are also small business, like Phoenix Motor Cars, definitely those types. New Flyer, who's Eldorado, ENC is what they go by now, formerly called Eldorado Bus. They're actually within your air basin. Their manufacturing facility is near Ontario. And so they manufacture at that facility buses with the fuel cell, yes.
And for the infrastructure that is needed for all of this, and you did show one slide that showed some monies with PUC and our electric utilities. What about fuel cell infrastructure? What work is being done on that?
Right. So here's the utility information there, and that's talking about those make-ready programs where the utilities provide infrastructure support to those charging stations. And so the state cost share opportunities, I put up a slide, and one of the programs I wanted to talk about was the California Energy Commission has an incentive program as part of Assembly Bill 118, and they annually get $100 million where they decide each year on how to spend that money. And Assembly Bill 8, which was reauthorization of the state and local incentive programs, that in that AB 8 required that part of the funds from that pot of funds the Energy Commission has would be going towards hydrogen fuel, hydrogen charging stations. And so they've been deploying hydrogen fueling stations throughout the state with that money. I hear my division chief, Jack Kutuski, say many times that incentives alone isn't going to pay for everything, but it's a great start. And I wanted to also highlight that, CARB took the unfortunate cheating scandal of VW, and we have this NOx mitigation funds. And so that $130 million that I know you, Board Member Mitchell, was on the board when the plan was adopted. So these transit agencies can apply for some of those fundings now. And if they do that now, then they can get credits. So you were talking about if it's a small agency, right, and they have, like, let's say 10 buses, well, it might behoove them to do early action now, they can get up to 180 if they're 100% up to that 180 if they're a transit agency, and then they could also earn credits on that zero emission bus on that requirement schedule.
And did I understand you to say that these funds will be delivered in 2 separate solicitations?
Yes, that's in their plan that they released. That's on the CARB website last month.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Oh, pleasure.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Go right ahead.
Thank you. I think I see a fundamental difference between the transit rule and the airport shuttle rule, and maybe you can help clarify. It seemed on the transit rule there was a purchase requirement, but on the shuttle rule there was also a turnover requirement, percentage turnover requirement.
Yes, that is correct.
So for the transit rule, I mean, since the buses can last 12 years, if it's a purchase requirement, it could take a lot longer to get that turnover to happen. And the transit agencies could also delay purchasing, so they haven't made any purchases. Is there concern about that being a bit of a loophole?
That brings up a good item, and they're in the strategy of their proposal. There's a commitment. I'm getting there. Hold on. No, where is it? The proposal. So on that third bullet, the waiver of the initial ZEV purchase requirement of early statewide progress towards zero emission targets in 2020. So if there's an incentive, if the transit agencies meet the state mandated requirement, then they'll get this revised thing. And I apologize, I just realized that the slide got cut in the final version with the details that I was looking for.
I was just wondering that. Also, there's at least one company locally here in Riverside that remanufactures buses. And, you know, because the frames last forever, but the bus itself lasts only about 12 years when it's in service. But they'll take a bus that's 12 years old and make it look brand new again. And they will also retrofit it and switch it out to be a zero emission bus. That's not a purchase per se. Would that apply to their credit somehow? Have you considered having them
right.
take their own old buses and have them retrofitted to be zero emission, battery electric most likely?
Yes, the team, the transit team that's developing this reg has taken that into account. And I don't want to say because I'm like 90% certain, but you know, sometimes if you're not 100%, it's best to not answer that. So I will make sure and get back, you know, have that
It's
staff.
not necessarily a purchase, but there could be transitioning in a very
Yes.
cost-effective way to zero emission.
If the fleet has that opportunity. I can speak on the airport shuttle bus that one of the airports, I can't remember if it's Kansas City or Indianapolis International Airport, they went ahead without any incentives, converted their CNG fuel buses to electric
BYDs, yeah.
drivetrain.
I know Kansas City did BYD buses.
Right. I think Coachworks was a manufacturer who did that work for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somewhere in here it said that the transit rule applies to 60% of all California buses, or 40%. So there's another 60% of buses in California. Some obviously are over-the-road coaches and things like that. But do we have an idea of how many of that remaining 60% increment are actually owned or operated or have contracts with public agencies that might technically fall under our fleet rule authority?
Right, bear with me.
Our authority.
So I think you're talking about this slide here, slide 3, where in the green font, over 60% of these buses within.
No.
No?
Represents the bottom part, represents 40% of all buses in California. So it means there's 60% of buses in California that aren't captured, but some of those might be, you know, owned by police, sheriff, somebody,
Right,
you know,
right.
other public agencies.
Or they, let's take it back for a moment. So this is showing the commitments of transit agencies who through board action, have made a commitment to do zero emission buses. So that's what this slide represents.
Okay.
It's not
So
just
the
the
transit.
All right, so I was completely misreading that. I was just wondering then, non-transit agency buses in California, if there's a segment of those that are actually owned or operated or contracted by public agencies, is there another part?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the proposed innovative clean transit rule would capture those, I call them contracted out services, yes. And the same for airport shuttle buses.
I've heard horror stories from people who buy electric buses about the rates that they get charged for charging. They're kind of sometimes astronomical rates that, you know, provide the disincentive because they don't have the savings that they should have, especially when we can procure renewables for so inexpensively now. And it would be essentially running our buses on sunshine, which would be fantastic. But the rates that they're getting charged sometimes can be very excessive. Is there anything that, and I know that ARB isn't the PUC and that municipal agencies kind of set their rates differently, but is there anything that ARB is doing to work with the utilities and the CUC and the municipal governments who operate their own, provide their own power to make sure that these zero emission buses aren't getting charged exorbitant amounts to charge their buses?
Right. So I hear what you're saying, and just to say a little bit, I have heard from at least one fleet operator about these absorbent prices that they had, and when we took a closer look at what they were doing, we realized that they didn't do what you can do there's technologies out there where you can manage your charging. And when you manage that, there's sophisticated software, I've been told, where it can help you manage your rate, right? So it's like a smart device where it helps reduce your fuel costs on that. And so there is technology out there to help fleets reduce that. And I have heard or seen at public workshops for airport shuttle bus where those companies come up and talk to those fleet operators and then say, well, gosh, let us help you. We can manage that. And I'm just overhearing this, so I'm sharing that. One thing that CARB does have is the low carbon fuel standard. And for airport shuttle bus, we've taken the typical operation of airport shuttle and run what we estimate, and it's all on the CARB website for that low carbon fuel standard. And we came up with about $10,000 per year credit value could be earned for that typical airport shuttle. So if you have your charging station there and you're plugging in your vehicle and you subscribe to the LCFS program, you can get these credit values, and then once you sell them, our estimates are that the airport shuttle fleet would get $10,000 per vehicle.
I heard an example out of San Diego that, I forget if it was the San Diego Transit Agency, but they had electric buses that were getting charged an exorbitant amount, and San Diego Gas and Electric actually went with them to PUC to get that amount reduced, so it'd be a more reasonable price to pay for charging during the day, because they had to charge during the day.
Yes, San Diego Gas and Electric had some great proposals. I'm looking for that 350 slide.
Yeah, but that was for
Yep. Right. So
different.
they have 150 million proposal of their priority proposed projects. One of them, we're hoping, I've been very curious to see how the CPUC will make a determination on it, but one of them would be some incentives for airport shuttle type operators.
Right. But I think that's for infrastructure, not for charging rates.
Some of the proposals in the early stage, I haven't read the latest proposal. They did, and specifically San Diego Gas and Electric had a special rate for, for
Incorporated into it. So
uh-huh.
I wonder if that might have just been a consequence of that example that I heard.
I think it may have been, and there is the rate design going on, and I'm not a lead on that, so I don't want to talk any more about that, but I have heard that it's definitely on people's thoughts, and would definitely advocate that you guys provide comments to the CPUC on the importance of the rate design. Yeah.
You certainly don't want to disincentivize the adoption. In terms of qualifying for incentive funding, obviously it has to be surplus. So what's surplus in this case? It means that they go beyond this 25% by those initial years or something like that. Is that what's considered surplus in the transit rule and qualify for incentive funding?
No, I don't know, but I can say that incentive programs, it depends on what program you're talking about.
Yeah.
And they all have different overlay usually attached with the money source, and they all seem to have different rules that apply to them.
Complicated. All right.
Yes,
Thank
very
you.
complicated. I do know that Fred Manassian staff does a wonderful job, and you could follow up specifics with him.
He might be the only person that
Mr. Chairman, I have another question I want to raise.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. We know that LAX is planning some substantial changes to their operations. And as I'm sitting here thinking about the shuttle buses, they plan to consolidate all the rental car agencies in one place. And I would assume we'll have a good reduction in those kinds of shuttle buses. And is anybody working with the airport on how that will impact? I hate to see them use the incentive monies for shuttle buses that aren't going to be in operation after they changeover at the airport?
Yes, we have been working with the airports and extensively with the California Airport Council. And in fact, one of our last public workshops, the last public workshop we held at LAX. So WAWA welcomed us and let us use their facility so we could be there where many of those private airport shuttles are owned and operated. And we did hear from many of the folks that are operating shuttle buses now to get to their separate rental car facilities. And yes, that is a very exciting efforts that LAWA will be doing at LAX, where they will have that consolidated rental car facility. And LAWA spoke at our December work group meeting about this project and many other projects they have going on to reduce emissions from their airport shuttles and other efforts going on. And so we are very excited about that people mover or electric rail, where it will mean that those shuttle buses won't need to be operated anymore. And I do know that, the LAX is operated by a public entity, and as a public servant, I have a lot of faith that public entities do make smart and wise investments. And I do know that LAX did purchase, it was in the news, 20 buses from BYD, those battery electric, and those would be used on the air side, so to get folks to the terminals. And so it sounds like that wouldn't be anything that would be replaced for that consolidated transportation hub. Yeah, from what I understand, it'll be online, hopefully before the World Cup's hosted here. Some of the games I was hearing.
That's the plan.
Yeah, in the Olympics too. Very exciting.
Right. Okay, just one.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. Just a comment. Metro is looking at developing our own factory to build our own buses. And I'm wondering, you mentioned DOE and AB8 funding available to incentivize infrastructure. I'm thinking that, perhaps Metro should be working closely on this to see how we can work together, because we're finding that while we are right now having a contract out to get some of these zero buses like New Flyer, BYD, and Potrero, that it's much better to begin to look at the future and invest also in our workforce here. So that's a big priority for our board, just to let other people know if they haven't been made aware. And that's a big priority for Phil Washington, our CEO on Metro.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Someone take the slide down so that. Alrighty. Any further questions from any of my colleagues? Any there in the audience would like to have comments? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much, Catherine. It certainly is a very insightful and presentation, and certainly a lot there for us to basically look at and to guide us as we basically implement some of the programs that we have here at AQMD. South Coast is it states there that 60% of all of these kinds of transit buses are really within our area. One of the questions that I do want to ask, it said that you had some special incentives and were doing some special things for disadvantaged communities. Always like to know, how do you define disadvantaged communities? The reason why I'm asking this is not about color, race, or anything of that nature. You've got people located next to refineries and located next to freeways where we have very large amounts of pollutants themselves being spewed out into the air each day. Are those the considerations? Are you really talking about something that is more generic, such as race and color and those kinds of situations?
So we are working on going off of what the Cal EnviroScreen defined. There was some state laws defining disadvantaged communities, and when we talk about that, we're talking about that as defined in those requirements.
Who's doing anything about things that really people are building large complexes of housing, et cetera, right next to freeways, and we know that that's where a lot of these pollutants themselves are coming from. Are they probably a part of that mix? Do you know at all?
It depends on where the location is. And I would like to talk about a few efforts that CARB's doing on trying to look at those things. So SB 375 is that smart land use planning, and it definitely talks about that nexus of providing smart planning where you have housing located near jobs, near transportation hubs, and so you reduce that vehicle miles traveled. And there's also CARB's health, research division put a very cool planning document together on ways you could do smart planning to reduce that pollution to community. For example, pictures I remember from this handbook document that's on the CARB website showed if you put vegetation near like a freeway sound wall, and the vegetation is trees, so it's up above, that it works, and studies have shown that it reduces that transport of those emissions to those nearby communities next to the freeways. And I'm also aware that US EPA has requirements on requiring the monitoring of near freeways, major areas where monitoring devices had to start being rolled out to be able to look at that exposure. And also with 617, that's definitely a hot topic about providing those community benefits now for communities next to refineries, next to freeways, next to metal plating facilities, wherever it is. So it's definitely more on that. Did you want to expand on that?
Sure. Thanks, Catherine. So, Dr. Parker, we're actually going to be talking about this in depth at our next committee meeting in September. But as you know, and as Catherine said, 617 has a very large component dedicated to disadvantaged communities and land use issues. And this is an issue that many groups are now grappling with, and the overall intent. And as you know, we, through our SEQRA program, interact with a lot of the local agencies, municipalities, and comment on a lot of these projects, particularly so where they're within disadvantaged communities. So we'll be talking a lot more at length about this in our next committee meeting, but just wanted to let you know we're actively engaged on this, and the primary driver to a certain extent is Cal EnviroScreen, and there's a lot of discussion going on even within Cal EnviroScreen's uses on its true representation of disadvantaged communities. For instance, there are places up in the Bay Area in East Bay that aren't defined as disadvantaged communities under Cal EnviroScreen because of some of the economic land cost considerations. And so there's talk about changing how Cal EnviroScreen actually makes those designations. But we'll be going about this in much more depth at our next committee meeting.
I'm glad to hear that, because it's always been one that I begin. I'm cognizant of the fact that today, in living in urban areas as we are here, especially in Los Angeles and San Francisco areas, that the definition itself is changing. The people that are being impacted, especially in the area in which we are focused on, and that's pollution, air pollution, doesn't necessarily mean ethnics and those kinds of things, but it really means the closeness itself of people to these facilities that basically are contributing greatly to the air pollution itself. All righty. Any other comments by any of my colleagues? we'd like to thank you. We know that you had to get up early in the morning because sometimes I have to travel to Sacramento coming down. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very informative. And we look forward to having you to come back again as things and stuff progress, and you're keeping us up to date as to what CARP is doing and how we can participate in those activities.
Well, my guess is you're going to this.
No, it's summer.
Oh.
My son's actually
Not there.
at home. Yeah. Of course.
Still sleeping.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so
Well,
much,
that's-
Dr. Parker, and those of you on the committee. And it's been a pleasure talking to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving right along, we have written reports. Anybody has any questions or comments and stuff on the written reports from Dr. Fine?
No staff, nothing to add by staff.
Nothing yet to add by staff. Then we will consider those to, without objection, to be received and filed. Lead agency projects and environmental documents received by HEMD. Do you have any, Dr. Fine, comments?
Nothing additional.
Any questions by anyone? Okay. Are there any other matters that we would like to have discussed among board members? Then public comments. Anyone there at C8 that has any comments?
Not here, Dr. Parker.
Okay, and none at your location?
No, Dr. Parker.
None here. Then I will basically say that our next meeting is scheduled not until September 21st. We get a month of reprieve. Thanks everyone for coming, and have a nice weekend, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.